Hey Drew, welcome to the Profit and Grit Show. How you doing?
Appreciate you having me, Tyler. I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm doing great too. So thanks for being here. I wanted to first I you were at Epic. Just I missed you. Probably passed you in the hall. But one of your presentations was around sales, and so that's kind of going to be the context of today's conversation. But before I get into that, I want to just learn a little bit about you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself professionally? Maybe a little personal tidbit.
Grew up in the trades. Long story. 61 years old. Started at age 8, emptying ashtrays and trash cans in the offices. At the business, and then at age 12, after swim team practices, would jump on a truck and be a pair of hands on a residential install job. And did that all the way through high school. Basically, worked in the warehouse, worked in the sheet metal shop that we had, worked in residential new construction. And then in high school, got into the inside portion of the business, working with the new construction department on blueprint takeoffs and manual load calculations back in the day, and did that in the 80s until I graduated. Then I went to college, got my degree at the University of Maryland, and came back to the business and got into picked up where I left off in the residential new construction estimating, and then got into office management, general management, marketing, sales, then sales management, and kind of did all that all the way up until we sold the business in 1996. And that was the first wave of consolidation. But uniquely enough, the consolidator for us was not another HVAC group. It was a utility company out of Delaware. And so I worked for the utility company for 18 months, and I left that, and then I went to work for Service Experts, a publicly traded company. Did that for 18 months. And 99, I jumped out on my own and started my own training, coaching, and consulting business, and I've been doing that pretty much ever since. And um, in there, like we talked about, with load calculations, load calculation is something definitely you need to do to be professional in your job and do your job accurately. But it's also something that helps you educate a customer and separate yourself from the rest of the pack. And so in 2014, unfortunately, lost a longtime friend who had a software company. Took it over, ran it for his widow for 3.5 years, and then my business partners and I, guys that I was working with on the software, we bought it off her, and we've been running a software business that creates sales tools for contractors. I have a great partner that I actually went to high school with. We had different marriages, but then we got back together at our 30th year reunion, Kim, and so I've been with her for 11 years, and I have two kids on my own, Paige and Tyler, 27 and 25, and she has three kids on her own from her family. And yeah, we moved into the city of Philadelphia during COVID when everybody was moving out, and so we've been loving city living for the last five or so years.
That's really cool. What a good story. Hey, okay, so I want to go back to the business and just your direction with it. You pretty much have worn every hat when it comes to like a trades business. It seems like you've gravitated a little bit more towards sales, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's your area. What lights your fire in that? And let's kind of go in that direction. I'd love to know what led you in that path.
Yeah, I was a salesperson for a bit in our company, but I really got bit by the sales management bug. My dad asked me to kind of take over very quickly after, just a short time out on the road. And that was that it was actually that marriage between marketing and sales. And I really just think it's all marketing. I think it's all messaging, right? And so you put the messages out there, the baton gets picked up by the call takers, and then gets handed off to the salespeople, who then hand it off to the installers or the technicians. All that psychology and philosophy behind the connection of one human to another, and how do you move that needle? How do we talk about winning sales, but you don't win sales. You either connect with the customer in a story or you don't. And I've always just found it fascinating. So I've made it my life study, since the early 90s, is to how do we create more and better connections with other human beings? Let the business kind of take care of itself. We actually got away from selling back in the 90s and really just started, connecting with customers and teaching them how to buy and how to get value for what they pay. And it's led to great success in my company. But the thing that really fascinated me was like, can I do this again somewhere else that's not my company, not Pennsylvania, and things like that? And so that's what I've been doing since, I really started with Service Experts, and then they had me fixing centers that were troubled and struggling, and been building businesses ever since.
What are common themes you see when it comes to sales, particularly in the trades? Like, what do you see mistakes that whether it be the salesperson or the owner of the company that's kind of not leading the person down the right path? What are you seeing? Are there common things?
The most common things are people think their job is to sell, to run the lead, to give a price, and to try and close it. And they try and do that usually on one visit. And and the reality is an educated consumer will buy, and they will make a smart decision. And so if you teach people how to buy and give them good information to make a good decision, they'll make a good decision. But if you run the call like every other salesperson and every other contractor runs the call, and you quote and hope and spray and pray, and you give a price on the on the first visit, usually within less than an hour's time, you're using the same software as everybody else is using nowadays to create a proposal that looks like everybody else's, and you're promoting brand, model, efficiency, and capacity. The customer is going to commodity and comparison shop it, right? And they're going to buy it like they buy electronics and cars and appliances and things like that. And the reality is where else in the world do you get a proposal to buy anything? You just don't, right? And so those are some of the mistakes that I see. And if salespeople in the trades, right, all contracting trades, landscaping, pools, hardscaping, windows, roofing, siding, gutters, all of that. If contractors just took the time to connect with customers and their story, and then teach them what they need to know about picking a contractor to design the scope of work first, what the scope of work needs to be, and why the price needs to be what it is, and how they can pay for it, and how you protect them and their investment. What I have found, and my business partner has found for the last 30 odd years, is more of them buy and more of them spend more money, right? And so we always tell customers, I don't care what you do as long as you do it knowingly. And that's my job, right? So let's get to work and let's see what's going on. And then, we'll see where we're going. Most salespeople are trying to close the business,
Right.
and they look and sound and feel exactly like every other clown in town. And they get treated like every other clown in town. And I hate to say that about contractors, but that's just the way they play the game. And why? Because it's the way every contractor plays the game. And so if they work somewhere else, that's what they know. That's what they've inherited. The manufacturers and distributors promote the brand, model, efficiency, and capacity of their equipment, but the equipment is just a part. It's a big part, and it's the most expensive part, but it's no more important than any other part in the recipe. Because if it's designed wrong and installed wrong, you get the wrong outcome, the wrong results. It doesn't function and perform the way that it should. It doesn't make them comfortable. It doesn't make them energy efficient and healthier, right? And it's the performance, it's the outcome, the results that the customer actually buys. They get the product. They don't want the product. They want the outcome and the results, right? But everybody's selling the product, so the customer shops that. It's because it's different than a car. It's different than appliances and electronics, where all the values in the thing, all the value in our things is from the design and the installation, and then verifying that, testing out that what you did is actually performing to the level that you said it would. But sadly, only about 2% of the contractors actually test in and test out and prove that their work, the work that they did is actually performing to the level that they promised that it would. And now, unfortunately, with this high efficiency advanced technology equipment, the lawsuits are coming. There's trade publications actually writing about this, and I just saw a presentation a couple of weeks ago where the speaker basically said, you're going to see over the next 5 years a wave of lawsuits against contractors.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Can you, as a real world example, can you kind of take me through, let's say we're talking an HVAC company and you've got the comfort advisor going out there for a new system for an install. In your mind, as much detail as you're open to sharing, what should that sales call look like? And how do we differentiate ourselves so we don't just look like the same Joe down the block?
Yeah. Sales processes, as people like to say, they all sound the same. And everybody will tell you, oh, I'm doing that, right? When I dig into the details behind it, they're not doing, what I say. Because it's not actually the frame, and I don't call it a process, we call it a framework.
Okay.
And it's a free-flowing, flexible framework that allows for your creativity and connection with that customer. But you go in, you have the meet and greet, exchange pleasantries, and then you get started. You ask why you're there and what has happened and how did they pick, why did they pick you to come out of everybody else that they had come out? And even if they're having multiple people, why did they call you? And then you get to work and you explain what your process is. That's the one thing I find that most salespeople never do. They just inflict their process. So I tell a customer, hey, most people I go out to visit with like yourself like to know a little bit about the process that we as a contractor have to go through and you as a homeowner should go through when making an investment of this magnitude. Does that sound fair? And they always say yes to that because it's like, wow, yeah, I didn't know there was an actual thing that you have to do and I should be doing, right? Everybody else just came in and did what they did, right? Mm-hmm. And that gives me an opportunity, as well to kind of explain it. And then if they're going to push back at all, they're usually going to push back right up front about, well, the last guy didn't do that. And you say, Yeah, I find myself apologizing on behalf of the industry more than I care to admit. There's a lot of companies out there that will take the shortcuts, but we won't. And it's the people who do business with us tell us they appreciate that we didn't do that. But you need to take my word for that. Go out and read the reviews. We have the most reviews with the most permits pulled, the highest score on those reviews, blah, blah, blah. Right. So then I do my process. And that process is obviously doing a complete conversation survey with the customer throughout my time with the customer. So that's not really a step. That just happens the whole time we're going around. But then I do a complete walk of the living space, and I look at the location of every supply and every return or radiator if we're doing wet heat. I measure the rooms for purposes of doing a heat loss, heat gain load calculation. I explain the importance of what that is. I'm looking also for tabletop humidifiers, air cleaners, portable humidifiers, window units, pellet stoves, little portable heaters, blankets, anything that they've used, ceiling fans, anything they've used to mask or adapt the environment, to make themselves more comfortable. Because a lot of times if you ask a customer if they have hot spots or cold spots, which is a bad question, by the way, they're going to say no, right? I say, take me to the hottest room at 4 o'clock on a hot summer day. Take me to the coldest room at midnight on a cold winter's night, right? Because they got one, right? So why ask if they've got one? They do. We all
Right.
do.
Right.
Right. So have them take you there and see what's going on. Right. So now that I've done the living space, then I can go behind the living space. I look at the building envelope because the building envelope affects comfort and load and air quality. I look at the equipment and the duct system and the electrical, and I gather all that information. And then I'm in a good position to have a conversation about, if I haven't already, we call it money conditioning, have a conversation about money and how they plan on paying for it and what their timeline is for having the work done and when they think about making the selection. And then I can put together findings, options, and share all of that with the customer, figure out where we stand at the end of that. In a nutshell, that's kind of it. There's obviously a lot of detail and nuance to it, but it's typically a 10-step process I teach. And, I taught for EGIA and Contract University as well. So
Yeah, you were just doing your presentation at Epic. Speaking
yeah.
of, yeah, that's awesome. Um, so in that presentation, is it the goal to walk out with a signed order, or I mean, how do you look at that? Because I know you talked about a lot of times we think about, we're just trying to close and get out of there. Like, what's an effective call, effective meeting like that? Is it to walk out with a signed deal, or is it setting it up for next meeting? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Russ and I, we've taught for years. We go after what is the best possible outcome for that particular visit. So sometimes it's an initial visit. It's information gathering. If
Okay.
I sense through the conversation that the decision isn't going to be made today, why would I give information to somebody who's not going to make a decision today,
Right.
right? And a lot of people seem to think that they're going to convince that customer to buy and push and all that, or take that shot. We call it probability pricing. Give the pricing information to the customer when you have the highest probability of them making a decision on that information, whatever that decision may be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about getting a sale. I've let go of my attachment to getting that result. It's about execution, right? And execution is, when should you give that information to have the highest probability of the customer connecting with that information and saying yes or no, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that you can't do the so-called one-leggers, right? But, on an initial visit, some people do buy, on the spot, but some don't. Your job is to read the room and then make a judgment call as to when you think it's going to be, most applicable to that situation and those people, to share the information. And then sometimes, obviously, it's a big job and you got to take the extra time to do a two-step process anyway. Now, the goal is the best possible outcome, right? And the best possible outcome is sometimes they buy from me, sometimes they buy from somebody else, sometimes they don't buy at all and they put the project on hold. I don't care what they do as long as they do it knowingly, right? So they see that I don't have my foot on the scale trying to get a result that serves me. Homeowners sniff you out and they know that you're pushing for a sale. They know the things that you do to try and get a sale. They're smart and savvy nowadays. I can literally, everything I've said to you on this call so far, I can literally say all that to a homeowner. I'm not here to sell you anything you don't want, you don't need, you can't afford, doesn't make sense. This is your home, it's your family, it's your bank account. And you have to be happy with the choices that you make. I don't, because I don't live here. I'll be happy if you're happy with the choices that you make, as long as you do them knowingly. And that's my job. So let's get to work and see what's going on. And see, just even that statement of intent, right, lowers the barriers, that are out there with customers. They see that I'm real and authentic and genuine. And then obviously some of the tools that I use, they basically say, well, geez, nobody explained this to me. Nobody did the level of detail that you did. Nobody showed this to me and is doing this, this type of stuff. And it's, not unusual.
Yeah.
Most contractors are trying to sell the job today, to get the revenue, to get the job on the board, right? To fill a crew day, get personal revenue and a commission and things like that. And you can be successful doing that. You definitely can, And there's lots of ways to get to a 50% closing ratio doing those types of things. But there's only one way to get to 70, 80, 90% connection ratio, and it's not that way. So you either pursue success and get achievement, or you pursue greatness and it's a state of identity and a place you come from,
Yeah.
right? And that identity is, I am a servant leader in the home to help other human beings live their best life.
Yeah. I definitely, in what you're saying, I hear, I'm putting myself in the position of the consumer, and I feel you diffusing the whole process. Like you're bringing down the barrier of I'm trying to close you as opposed to I'm trying to educate you. And I think as soon as as a consumer, you hear that, you kind of drop your guard and you really are there. You're now comfortable asking questions. You're not feeling like it'll get rushed through. And it just opens up, hopefully, a natural conversation to what's best for me in my situation.
It typically does. I mean, I've had customers spend, $20 to $40,000 more with myself or one of the people that I work with in coaching ride-alongs and such than anybody else even quoted. And it's not that they spent more. It was different, right? The scope of work and the outcome promised, guaranteed in writing, by the way, or your money back if you're not happy, was different. And they literally thanked us for saying, thank you for taking the time to walk me through this. I was ready to make a decision for $8,000 or $1,000, and you came in at 23. Right. And this just feels like it's going to give me what it is that I want. And then the guy actually added a $7,000 change order after the fact, and so he ends up spending 30 when the other two companies, one quoted $1,000, another quoted $8,000. One was duct work only, another one was some duct mods and equipment. And we were a complete redo of the entire duct system, all new equipment, and just a different approach to the job. Right. Yeah. Because I found out, this gentleman I was riding with, we found out who the customer was and what they really wanted. And where we were and why things weren't working the way that what they needed to do. And then we just said, okay, well, what do we need to do to basically make this the right thing? I don't care about any other clown in town and what they're quoting, right? Because they're not us and we're not them. And customers will try and compare. I mean, I'm not telling you the customers won't try and compare what we're doing. If I haven't done my job to teach them about how to get value and how to select a contractor in that right scope of work, then that's going to be on me. That's not on them.
Right. Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. You had mentioned Jason Walker before we started. You were on his podcast recently, and I had sat in on one of his presentations. And in that presentation, he talked about how he designed this coloring book, and it's a pretty elaborate coloring book. It's not just thrown together. And he actually gives it to the child when he comes into the presentation, and of course, the child keeps them busy, which is a good byproduct. But then one step further, he has them give it to them at the end so they can put it as part of a contest. And I guess the kids really get into it. I thought that was really creative because it wasn't like a little cheesy. It shows the whole history of his company. What do you think about that idea? And then what are other differentiators maybe how we can separate ourselves from just looking like the next guy down the street?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Jason and I talked about that. Yeah, I did that at Cameron and Sons, and we used them there. We used them at trade shows and home shows and things like that too. And we did the contests, and it's neat because it engages the customer. And also, if you really think about it, it starts the recruiting process into the industry, right?
It does.
A little bit. Yeah, there's just all kinds of nuanced little things. Certainly, you can carry treats for pets. Always ask for permission before you give the coloring book to the kids or treat to the pet, stuff like that. And just your tools and your process and how you explain things to customers. Doing load calculations is important, and airflow analysis, pulling out flow hoods. You could certainly go as far as duct blasters and blower doors too, right? But at least flow hoods and infrared thermometers and just ways to make air visible, right? This is like, this invisible thing that we're trying to communicate and educate customers on. It's not like bottled water, right? I mean, I grew up drinking out of a hose outside as a kid, right?
Me too, by the way.
Or out of the spigot, right? But nowadays we'll pay $4 or $5, depending if you're at a concert or something like that. It might even more if you're in Vegas. Heck, it was $10 or $15 for a bottle of water, right? But
yeah,
we've bottled water, and they have bottled oxygen. That's not the same. Right. Our job is to make air visible, however we can, make it tangible. And the more visible and tangible we can make it, to all the participants in the conversation, the more we can kind of bring it to life and make them see, this is responsible. We are responsible for the health, well-being, safety, and comfort of your family. I mean, whether or not you get a good night's sleep in this house is really predicated upon me. Whether or not you're safe, your kids and you are safe from the invisible things floating in the air, that comes down to us. That's why we were essential services and are essential services. I work with clients and say, listen, you can't do everything all at once, right? But just tweak and add. Jason does something neat with adding LED lights, to some of his installs. Okay, it's kind of cool. Not everybody gets it, but there's all kinds of things that you can talk about during your sales process, but also as part of your installation process, part of your service call and maintenance call process, as well as part of your call taking. The one thing I do find in this industry, which is shocking, is the post transaction process. It like doesn't exist in like 95+% of the business, meaning there's no back end loop except the review nowadays. Nobody's thanking the customer. Happy calls went away with the review, right? So nobody's reaching out to the customer to check in on them human to human. Nobody's sending a little thank you gift on service calls or a big one on installs, right? Nobody sends the salespeople back to do a post customer verification, making sure that they're happy with the job, have any questions or things like that, and then delivering a thank you gift. Some of them will mail something, through a third party, some, but very few, right? I mean, these people are spending probably, on installs, 20,000 plus, you're not even thanking them. Yeah. So there's all kinds of little nuanced ways that you can just separate yourself from, the common contractor out there. I've always said in my training, don't be a contractor in business, be a business in contracting, right?
Yeah.
And the business is not the vocation. The business is taking care of people.
Yeah. That's huge. That mindset shift is huge when you say it that way. Load calculations you talk about a lot. Now, I know of those because I'm in this industry and I hear the terminology and I'm inquisitive. But as a consumer, I might not really know what that means. Like if I'm Joe Consumer, Jane Consumer, you start talking load calculations, I'm going to gloss over probably. How do you bridge that gap, and how do you do it in a way that it comes off that you're trying to educate versus kind of, because sometimes contractors, just people in their professions in general, my profession is guilty of this. We use these big buzzwords and it makes us look smart, and it's really kind of intimidating the consumer more than helping them to understand. How do we make that not happen with load calculations and other types of things like that?
Well, something you said right in there is actually the point, right? It's like we got to make it simple, right?
Yeah.
We use terminology and phraseology and acronyms and abbreviations, and we just talk about them freely like everybody understands it. I mean, I ride along with salespeople all the time and they talk about Manual J. What's Manual J, right? Manual J is a protocol by a standards organization known as Air Conditioning Contractors of America. They happen to write one methodology for load calculations. They're not the only one, but it is one. It's probably one of the more popular ones because they've pushed it out there. That's what they're all about, is standardizing things. But I learned about load calculations a long, long time ago. I got certified in ACCA Manual J, D, S, T, L, and N. And those are standards for designing and installing systems. And so those are standards that they wrote, but they're just a way, not the only way. National Comfort Institute has protocols. ASHRAE has protocols. Building Performance Institute has protocols. So long and short of it is, I tell customers, your house loses heat during the winter and it gains heat during the summer. And we need to size the equipment properly to make sure that the system can remove the heat on the hottest day and heat the house on the coldest day. The problem with that is that the technology has changed over time. We now have high efficiency advanced technology, right? Your house was built in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s at a time when this technology wasn't even imagined. And so we no longer size to the tonnage like you may have heard. We size to the actual BTUs that you lose and gain. And we can fine tune that with the duct system and the airflow and the type of equipment that we put in. And so, I do a process to measure all the windows, the doors, the insulation values of the exterior walls, floors, and ceiling, appliances and people, put that all into a piece of software, the direction the house faces, and we pull in weather data from third parties. And then it tells us how much heat your house is losing and gaining. And then we size to that. I can't assume that when the builder built your house in 1970, that he knew what he was doing, hired a contractor, knew what they were doing, or that they did it right. We make no assumptions to that. Right. So I can't size based on square footage, and I can't size based on the machine size that you have. Those would be two red flags for you, Bill and Susan. Since you said you're talking to some other companies, if they don't do a load calculation, even Consumer Reports, are you familiar with Consumer Reports?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, even Consumer Reports, the leading consumer advocacy magazine, says you as a homeowner shouldn't do business with me as a contractor or any contractor if they don't do this process. So beware. Make sure that they do the load and that they show it to you. You're entitled to see that. You're not entitled to get it, right? Because that's their design process, as it is my design process. But we will do it. We will show it to you, and that will help you see why the equipment is what it is and what your choices are, right? Because once I now know that, then I know how much air I need to move. Then I can tell whether or not your duct is adequate. Then I'll measure the duct performance, because there's a low possibility that your system is going to deliver you comfort and happiness and energy efficiency. If I don't verify airflow, there's a high probability that you'll be happy if I do it. And so we're going to also take the blood pressure of the system. So then we do static pressure tests, we pull out the flow hood, At the very least, pull a tape measure and a duculator for God's sakes, right? But I'm telling you, contractors are lazy. I love them, but they're lazy. They won't do it. They honestly believe that their gut is smarter than the tools, and they're wrong.
Right, right. What do you think when it comes to that's great stuff, by the way. What do you think when it comes to hiring the right salesperson? Do you believe that profile is someone that has last past experience in this area? Is it someone that maybe doesn't even have a sales profile and we grow them into that? Is it someone that has different types of sales? I mean, what do you generally see are going to be the most effective to be an educating type salesman like we're talking about?
I've hired people, Tyler, from all walks of life that have had all types of backgrounds. It all depends on the client, the company, and what they need at that point in time, right? But so I can get anybody. I shouldn't say anybody, but I can get the right person if they have the right, mentalities, right? So they got to have desire. Number one, I can't
Okay.
teach desire. I can talk about the importance of that desire, right? Desire to be successful, desire to make money, right? Responsibility. They are responsible and will take responsibility for everything good or bad in their life as well as their business. 100% responsible for the message success of their life and their career. They don't blame the leads. They don't blame the market. They don't blame the competition, the pricing, the marketing, things like that. Commitment. They're committed to doing whatever it takes legally and ethically to be successful. And then outlook. They are positive people, optimistic, and they would bet on themselves 9 ways a Sunday and twice on Sunday, right? And those are what we call the four crucial elements. If they don't have those, and I can find out through interviewing, they don't get hired whatsoever. It doesn't matter what their background is. From there, ideally, I like somebody who does have a sales background,
Okay.
but also somebody who's outside the industry. I rarely promote from within, from a technician or an installer, because there's just a lot of baggage and typically bad habits.
Okay.
And just because you were a selling technician, if you were a selling technician or you were a technician or an installer, that wouldn't make you a good salesperson. And just because you were a good salesperson selling cars or something like that doesn't mean you could be a good HVAC salesperson, right? So through the interviewing and screening process, I can typically weed somebody out. The other thing I found is, and these are two other things that are real big indicators. Number one, you have to have a track record of having earned my first year income, meaning my first year income for somebody is above $150,000, right? Depends on what the background is, but typically it's about $180,000 first year potential income. And we'll talk about income, I know, a little bit. But if you've been making 40 to 60 or $80,000, I'm not giving you $180,000 opportunity. People might think that that's wrong and foolish. You may have gotten other people from there. Yeah, you can. But I'm not necessarily looking for a project that's going to take that amount of time to kind of probably get up to speed, unless I really feel in the gut that that's the right move to do. But rarely is it, because I need somebody who has an overhead nut to crack at home, right, to pay for a lifestyle that they got to pay for. The way they're going to do it is through their job. So I'm looking for somebody who's got that track record. And then lastly, your buying habits. So I always ask people about how they buy things. How do they go to market to buy vehicles? How they appliances, electronics, things like that. And if they tend to be shoppers, they go and exhaustively shop the process and comparison shop products and customer companies rather. That's somebody who I can teach and train things on, right? But that's going to be in the back of their head. If a customer says they want to shop, they're going to be like, yeah, I probably would too. So your buying cycle and your buying style has to be consistent with what I teach. If it's not, that's usually a heavy lift. I can get you there, but it's your project, right? So how fast can I get somebody up to speed is usually in there as well, because sometimes a client needs somebody like within 60 days. Some people I could basically take a project on over the next 6 months.
Yeah. A couple questions. You mentioned those four traits. One of them was desire or drive, I'll call it. I used to hire salespeople many years ago, and I always felt like the desire drive one was my hardest one because everybody comes into an interview and says, yeah, I'll work 1,000 hours a week. I live and breathe the company's colors. And, it all sounds good. But then when you get on the field, a lot of people fall quickly into that, like, well, I'm only going to do so much and I'm at a certain level. How do you feel you ferret out like that desire or drive in those initial meetings of getting to know someone?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the interview process, right? The interview process will tell you everything. So I have what we call knockout questions that we can do it either digitally nowadays, or we can do it through a call taker who can ask some questions. That then determines whether or not you're after the knockout questions, if you're qualified qualified, you then get a phone interview with me as the recruiter if I'm doing the job. And that's a 30-minute phone interview. I don't do Zoom interviews because that slows the process down. I'm trying to do them
Okay.
in 30 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. So I
Okay.
have 18 questions that I ask, up to 18 questions that I can ask in 30 minutes and kind of get an assessment of that. And then I basically was determined from that who are the most qualified to bring in for face-to-face interviews. You don't get a face-to-face interview if you didn't go through the first two steps. I can also have you fill out a screening at that point if I want, but I don't like to put those barriers up in front of somebody until I've had that face-to-face interview, whether that be video. Sometimes it's video, depending on where we're doing things from. But that'll be the third part of that process. And in there, I'll ask questions that weed out your desire. Right there's usually a couple, three or four questions in there that tell me whether or not you are committed. But that you also have an ecosystem at home, right, that's supportive of that. Because I know when I hire you, I don't hire you, I hire your family,
Sure.
right? And you're going to be, I know you're going to be away from your family, husband or wife and kids, nights and weekends on occasion. And I'm not looking for somebody who's working 5 nights a week and every Saturday and things like that. I know that everybody wants to have a life, and I want everybody to have a life. I'm looking
Sure.
for my
Sure.
salespeople to work, 40, 50 hours a week. They can take, cut out early on Fridays, half a day on some Saturdays, not every Saturday. And then we'll be flexible to work with them in their schedule and their kids' commitments and things like that, because, the time today is different than when we came up in the trades. And people full-time, I think, in full-time employment is really trending towards 30 hours. I mean, that's what people want to work. They want to work 30 hours and they want a life and they want to spend time with their families. And in fact, a lot of them would rather volunteer than put in overtime, right?
Right.
Because it feeds their soul. And that's fine. I'll support that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Even when you use that example of shopping, what's their shopping behavior? That's pretty deep. Like I never really, that's a great way to approach that and just to see what their thought process is. Because you're right, we put our own limiting beliefs in, or I shouldn't say limiting beliefs maybe, but however we believe something is probably how we're going to approach it in the sale. And it could limit us. I guess that is the right word. It could limit in the way we think rather than maybe think a different way and get more progress in the conversation.
Yeah. So I've studied a lot about the brain and psychology and philosophy, and the brain is an interesting, machine, right? And so I can teach you about certain things, right?
Yep.
But at some point, you make three moves, right? The brain makes three moves, and then it's exhausted by what it was taught, and it defaults to what it just has been its operating system for, in this case, 60 odd years, right? I can teach people to say certain things and give them scripts and things like that, but I don't teach people that. I teach people principles and concepts so that they become themselves. They find their own words, but they have to understand the psychology behind what they're doing and why they're doing. Russ and I talk about this all the time. It's not your ability. If I gave you Titleist balls and TaylorMade golf clubs and FootJoy apparel, it doesn't make you a professional golfer. You got to be able to make the
Makes me
shot.
look like one.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so it's not about the equipment even, right? It's not about even the tools. It's about the ability to make the golf shot. And so people ask about software and sales tools and things like and sales processes and sales training. Are you as an individual capable of really connecting with a human being at a meaningful level and teaching them how to buy and how to get value? If you're transaction and coin operated, you're not for me. You can be successful, you just can't be great. It's actually that law of the lid, as they call it, the chasing the outcomes that becomes the great limiter. You have to let go of your attachment to getting results. You'll see that you get more results.
Yeah. Do you, when a client hires you and they ask you to train their sales team, do you get into like evaluating the salespeople where you go, wow, this probably isn't going to be the right fit? And then do you go back to the owner? What does that look like in terms of when you're going through that process?
Depends on what the client's looking for. If they just
Okay.
hire me to recruit, hire, train, and coach people, or just do training, which I've done, then I just do the job, right?
Okay.
But if you're basically saying, hey, we're not where we are, and we know we have a lot of potential, and we've struggled, and we need to figure out what's going on, and it's more of a consulting, initiative. Then yes, I'll go in and we'll evaluate the entire sales team. We'll evaluate the marketing. We'll evaluate the tools, the process, everything, the culture in the company. And yes, if there was a client that we went into a few years back, and my business partner Russ and I, they had 9 salespeople doing like $4 million at a sub 30% connection ratio, $4,500 average ticket. And I mean, abundance of leads. And we went in and just like Russ and I looked at each other and said, we think it would be easier just to start over. And so we literally said that to the owner, and the owner said, yeah, I'm not going to fire everybody. He goes, how about, what else do you got? And I said, well, how about this? How about we give them 6 months to assimilate, right? Here's the thing. They don't believe that we're going to be here for the long term. They believe that we're just the next thing, right? Because the guys told us that, right? And so we said, well, how about we give them 6 months to assimilate? They can quit now. We'll pay them 2 weeks of severance. If they leave, no harm, no foul. We'll shake hands and say goodbye. The door will still be open if they choose to come back, but they would have to qualify to come back. But they have 6 months to assimilate. And so if they don't assimilate, somewhere in there, they'll probably be let go. They can maybe also quit somewhere along the way. We dehired one almost immediately. And then over the next 6 months, we lost another couple or three. And then, so we took them down to 4 salespeople. We added one. And in less than 2 years' time, we doubled the revenue, took the connection ratio up to 50%, took the average ticket up to $8,000, right? And this is a company now doing, hundreds of millions of dollars in home services. We worked with them for about 10 years, about 12 years, actually. And we built the sales team up to 14 people. We got them into generators. We got them into indoor air quality, crawl space encapsulation, insulation, plumbing services, and expanded the entire brand. But yeah, sometimes the people you got are the wrong people. So sometimes to change your people, you got to change the people.
Right.
Right.
I,
So sometimes
I
people
want
won't
to
change.
I want to add though, when you said that part where they just felt like you were kind of the flavor of the month and you would probably be gone in 6 months, that is such a true thing in small businesses. Like employees get wind pretty quickly if the owner's got a shiny object type mentality, and they're after a while they're just going to endure it for 3 months or a month, and they know it's going to go away, and then the next thing comes in. And so it's interesting that they were just really that open to you, like, hey, dude, you're going to be gone in 3 months, and life will go back to normal. It sounds like is what their mindset was.
That's what the salespeople thought. The owner said
Yeah.
differently. He goes, after we told him what our second thought was about so we actually dehired the entire team right away,
Oh, wow.
ceremonially. We said, listen, the job you have no longer exists. You're all fired, right? Now, I say, good news. We got another job. Here it is, right? New
That's straight
processes,
out
new
of Glengarry Glen Ross, right? Isn't
yeah,
that
well, to some extent, yeah, yeah. And so man, a sheer look of panic. And I said, because we knew what you're thinking. And we said that the owner, signed a 2-year contract to us, made a 2-year commitment to us. So we're going nowhere, right? You're not going to wait us out. We're going to be here. And the commitment you have is that we'll do whatever we can in our power to help you be successful. I just won't do your job. The day I feel I have to do your job is the day I no longer need you, and you will be let go. And it was a great run. I mean, we did all that we could, and it was by the time we left, 12 years later, we kept adding value, so they kept us. But 12 years later, it was just time to go. It was just time,
yeah,
like, hey, let's
huge.
turn it over to you and your people. Bring us in as you need us. And then we ran into them last week at Epic, and they talked about bringing us back in. So
That's awesome. Yeah, that's huge. That's a huge run. Okay, two things I want to talk about before we wrap up. I want to talk about being a numbers guy. I'd love to know. I love hearing you say like average ticket and things like that. What are some KPIs or numbers that are really critical that we should be thinking about in this realm of sales? Salesman in terms of numbers, salesperson in terms of numbers. And then the last thing I want to close out on is just compensation plans. Just maybe talk about what are some things we should be looking there for a well-designed compensation plan. So the first one, if you could maybe get into KPIs a little bit, like what ones resonate with you? Average ticket sounds like one that keeps popping up.
my average ticket is different. It's going to vary by market. It's going to vary by
Okay.
scope of work that the markets require, price points that the contractors pay. I mean, contractors buy equipment for different prices. It's just the way that it is. And so therefore that drives what your price needs to be. So the average price is more of a metric. It's not a KPI because there's no
Okay.
specific KPI to achieve, right?
Okay.
KPI is a vetted number that we know to go after, right?
Okay.
Average ticket though, I like to see it be above 18,000 pretty much in most markets nowadays. And that will move obviously if you go with modulating or staged equipment and full duct systems and full air quality and things like that. But north of 18,000 seems pretty good for a complete system solution nowadays. Average revenue per lead, we like to see that number be above 4,000. So that is a KPI. That shows that you're basically revenue per lead. It's meaning all opportunities run, not just the ones that you sold. It's looking at, are you paying for the marketing? right? Are you paying for the opportunities that you were, were created and given to you, right? The higher that number, the better. Connection ratio. A lot of people call it closing ratio. I don't want you closing. I want you opening the conversation and connecting with people, right? You connected with their story or you didn't. So when I look at your number, if your number is less than 50, that's telling me you're not connecting with the majority of the people and their stories and their needs, right? And so, yeah, I want to see that be, 40, 45 or so the first year, over 50 the second year, and above 60 consistently the third year and beyond. If you get there sooner, great. But if you start performing below that, and I know every so often somebody lays an egg, that happens. We're looking at a run rate. So it's that ongoing performance analytics that we look at. Number of jobs first call quoted versus two-step processes. When I see that number jumping above 40, the number of jobs quoted on the initial visit, unless you're running all service agreement customer opportunities, if that number goes above 40, I start to see closing ratios and average tickets start to drop. And the reason is that guys are quoting everything on the initial visit and they're falling irrelevant to the customer's buying process. See, you might have a sales process, but they have a buying process, and their buying process is designed to stop your sales process. Right? They're going to buy what they want, when they want, how they want, and for their reasons. And so stay relevant to them. And then you got to be financing, and financing is leasing, traditional loans, credit cards, right? You got to be financing, I think, 60% or more of your business. I don't care about the market. If you're not helping people see the value and taking advantage of 0% or long-term low rate payments, then, because we live in a subscription society nowadays, if you're not helping them see that, then again, there are people who would do business with you if they could see that it made sense financially to do business with you, but you didn't make it relevant to them, right? Because we don't earn all our money at once. We probably don't want to spend it all at once, but you're asking for it all at once.
Wow. So you think a typical, using HVAC as an example, probably should have 60% of its installs is probably how you mean it, are probably going to be finance based.
Finance, lease, credit card, yes.
Got it. Wow. Okay. Very cool. That's good. That's a lot of good numbers there that are a blueprint for me. And then last thing I want to talk about a little bit is just comp plans. How do you go in terms of what's your thought process in terms of a good comp plan? How should it, how much are you spending time in terms of driving behavior, things like that? I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah. Compensation is very interesting. People always ask me about compensation. I said, well, it depends. If it's based on your objectives for the position, right? And so let's focus on a residential salesperson.
Yeah.
It's about driving, results and performance and incentivizing, success and such, and rewarding, that connection. And so I've tried every way under the sun to compensate over the years. The best I have found is during the training period, you pay them a salary, that's, the training salary, and then you put them on a draw up to 6 months. They can get off the draw at any point in time during that 6 months. Once they get off the draw, they can't go back on the draw, right? And so the draw is basically an advance earnings, right? And I pay commission based on your connection ratio. So the higher your connection ratio, the higher your commission. And so the goal is in the industry, I think, is about 10%. You could go more, right? But I think 10% of what you sell, it should be roughly about what you earn. Now, if you start through hitting, certain KPIs or certain goals and things like that, stretch goals that I give you in the way of revenue or average ticket, or revenue per lead, things like that, then I'll pay you incentives above what you've earned in the way of commission to month basis. But my target commission for most people is 8%. If you go into that 50+% connection ratio, then I'll pay you 10, right?
Okay.
And then there's bonuses to be earned on top of that, right? If you fall below the threshold of 40%, then your commission is going to drop. So I'm not punishing you. I'm incentivizing you to get to a certain, commission level. Because I've tried, I call them detractors. I've tried detractors. All they do is demoralize salespeople.
Yeah.
Especially if they're close to a line, if they're close to that line of demarcation of going, to the next level, and they just missed it or something like that. I mean, it actually had the exact opposite effect. We thought we were, having some deterrence, if you will, to low closing ratio or low performance. No, it's going to happen. And then you just basically hit the guy while he was down.
Yeah.
With a detractor, right? So I basically gave a nice window as to where they can achieve a good, healthy earnings. They got to perform. They got to stay there. They got to be right in that sweet spot.
Yeah. That's one I used to struggle with, is like the carrot or the stick approach. And I kind of came up with the same thing too. The carrot seems to always have a lot more impact than trying to do the takeaway method. Just for, like you said, when the person's down, you're just kind of kicking them.
Yeah. Last thought on that is what I really found over time, as did Russ, is it requires real strong leadership, right? You need sales leadership in an organization. You don't manage salespeople. You don't manage people. You lead and coach people. You manage systems and processes. And so you got to hold your people accountable to the systems. And if they won't stay accountable to the systems, then I'll coach them on it. But if they keep being violators of the system, they can't work here. I don't care. I have dehired $2.5 million salespeople, $3 million salespeople, because they wouldn't follow my protocols. No matter how many times I coached them, they wouldn't do their debriefs. They wouldn't fill out their report right. And this is back when things were, not as digital as they are today. But in order to have the job, you got to be able to do the job, the entire job, not just be successful at closing. I dehired my older brother twice, who was the best salesperson I ever worked with.
Really?
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, do the job right or don't have the job. Right. And so, yeah, but you only get hired back twice because you're related to the family. So
that's my new word, though, dehired. I like that word. I'm gonna work on that one. So just in terms of wrapping up here, websites that you'd like to share. I believe flowodyssey.us is one of your websites. Anything else you want to share? I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes. Anything else if people want to reach out to you? And do you want to talk about Flow Odyssey?
Yeah, Energy Design Systems is our software company, eds.tech. We have software tools over there that support the sales, process, eds.tech. And then flowodyssey.us, that's the training, coaching, and consulting company. And within a month, we're going to be releasing a video archive of training between Russ and I. It's next level. There's nothing else out there like it, because it's not just standard process and things like that. It's all the nuanced stuff that everybody always asks us about in the classes, and that'll build itself out over the next couple of years too. And then obviously Contractor University, mycontractoruniversity.com, my affiliation with EGIA, but I'm on the board of directors there. I'm one of the national trainers and founders there. And you can get access to a lot of my content and tools and resources there too.
Okay, cool. I'll put all 4 links in the show notes. People want to reach out to you. I can't thank you enough for being on here. I feel like we could talk another hour, but I appreciate you sharing your info, and I'll keep my eyes open. I know you're out on the speaking circuit, so I'll keep my eyes out open. Hopefully I can connect with you in person next time.
Sounds good. I appreciate it, Tyler.
Have you there.
Thank you. Take care.
Welcome to Profit and Grit. It's profit and grit, not luck and a wish. From the wrench to the spreadsheet, we're stacking our chips. Slow season hits, man, we tighten the ship. It's the blue collar way we build, not dip.